brought a few issues also PBST magazine.
बुलेटिन करके एक मैंने ऑनलाइन देखा है.
Also from the articles. And there, early 80s, we came to know about this correspondence between Gandhiji and Gandhiji. So we are going to study chapter 12, Hatta Varga, and then we'll study Hatta. This Hatta is used in the conventional sense here. So start, Deepak can start from here.
Tanache Yanam
Yam.
Janacha
Yanya. See, so Hindi is difficult to read.
Janyacha Rakheyanam Rakheyanam Sur Kikhato
Surakhitam.
Surakhitam Idam Anyartam Yamam Patijagye Panditam
Attanancha Piyangunya Rakhenam Surakhitam Yennam Anyataram Yamam Patijagye Panditam. Attanam Piyam Janya, अपने को प्रिय जानते हुए हिंदी में कहते हैं तो रखें रखो नाम उसको सुरक्षित, तो अपने को you hold yourself dear, then keep it protected, keep it well guarded. How? तिन्नम अन्यतरम यामम, तिन्नम तीन जो याम होते हैं, तो ट्रेडिशनली रात के तीन याम बताए जाते हैं, तीन का है, उन तीनों यामों में ऑल द 3 वॉचेज ऑफ द नाइट पटिजज्ञेय पंडित let the wise person be watchful, be mindful. So this is the advice given in the first. And the story is about one prince who didn't have any child, and then there must have been a tradition in those days that if a great man comes, they used to put white cloth so that the great man will walk on it, and then the footprints of that person would be there and they would respect it. So Buddha advised him to remove it. He didn't want to get into all these kind of things. So he said, you remove this cloth, and then he walked inside. And then he said that they were not having children, and then Buddha told them why they were not having children. In the past life they had done some such act which involved killing of birds in a large number, without their feeling any remorse. And therefore, because of that they were not happy. So they were not mindful at that time, and that is the consequence of that. So that is the story associated with that.
Specifically, 3 watches of the night ही क्यों watchful रहने देता है?
Probably during the day they would mostly be watchful. So even, but the idea is just, I understand that more like a metaphor, that one should be constantly mindful. So if you are mindful during night, hopefully you will be practicing mindfulness during day also. I presume that must be the case.
अत्तानमेव पठमं प्रतिरूपे निवेशये अथन्यमनुशासेय न किलिस्सेय पंडितो.
Beginning is the same. Attanang Pathamam. Pathamam means प्रथम, पहले अपने को पति रूपे निवेश ठीक ठाक कर लो अपने. First do set oneself in proper order. अथन्यम अनुशासे, उसके बाद भी अन्य को अनुशासन करो. Only then you instruct others. न किलिस्सेय पंडितो. Wise person should not be impure. So should first establish oneself and then try to instruct others. So this is about, again, a monk who was a very good orator and a good teacher. He could teach things better, but his behavior was not in accordance with what he taught. So he taught about austerity, but he himself was very greedy. And then there is a big example given how he went from monastery to monastery and wanted to collect the robes when the robes were being given for the rains retreats. So then the other monks told them that this is what he is doing. He is collecting robes from so many points. And then Buddha advised him with this verse that he is a good instructor, but he should first establish himself. Whatever he teaches others, he should first practice. Like read the book. Can you read Hindi or no?
Okay. Attanam Chitaka Karina Yatha Manusa.
This is Nyo. Yathanyam.
Manusa. Sugantu
दुग्धम. अत्तानंद अपने को चरे तथा करेगा. यथा अन्यम अनुशासते. जिस तरह दूसरों को अनुशासन करते हो वैसे अपने को भी कहो. एडवाइज योरसेल्फ आल्सो लाइक दैट. सुदंतो वत दम्मे थे. सुदंतो मतलब जो खुद दमन कर चुका अपना, जिसने अपने आप को ठीक से रेस्ट्रेन किया. ही कैन टीच अदर्स. अत्ता ही किरम दुद्दम. अपने को कंट्रोल करना काफी मुश्किल है. Advice given that if only what one advises others one does, then really that is a really good thing. So only one who is restrained himself, only then he can do it for others. So there is again a story about a monk who had various teachers, and then he used to ask them to meditate and go for his hut and sleep there and tell them to keep awake. So one day they found out and they were very disappointed. And then told the Buddha, and Buddha advised him accordingly. So let's read the fourth one. Very famous verse.
अत्ता ही अतनो नाथो को ही नाथो परोसिया अतना ही सुदेंतेन Natham labhati dullabham.
No, atta hi attano nath. One is indeed one's own Lord. There is no, who else, where else can you find any other Lords? So this has been used as a indicator of self-effort, not depending on any deity for improvement. Attana hi sudantena natham labhati dullabham. When you restrain yourself, then you get a great Lord within yourself, because you have restrained yourself. And that is a very powerful statement, often quoted. It's about a woman who wanted to become a nun, and when she went to the monastery, she became pupil of Devadatta, and she didn't know that she was already pregnant. So when she came to the monastery, then she realized that she was pregnant. And when she told Devadatta, he said, "You better get out and don't stay here," because he misunderstood her pregnancy. So then he sent for others. Then the lay women were called, Visakha, and when they examined her and found that she was already pregnant and she didn't do any misdeed in the monastery. And then she continued as a nun, gave birth to a son who was adopted by the king. And the son became a novice at the age of 7, and at the age of 18 he got the ordination. And then he went to forest, practiced there for 12 years and became a, and came back. So when he came back, his mother was very much attached. So she wanted him to be with him, and then he had already become Arahant, and he told her, "How is it possible that you have been a nun for so long and still you have not got over this affection?" And then the woman reflected and felt that I have been waiting for so long and now he talks harshly to me. And slowly then she realized the danger of all that. Practiced more strenuously and then became an Arahant herself. And the last one, would you like to see?
Attana hi kadam papam attajam atta sambhavam abhimat matpati dummedham vajiram vasmam mayam mani.
अत्तानं ही कतंग पापम, अपने आप से जो पाप किया हुआ है, अत्तजम अपने से उत्पन्न हुआ, अत्त संभव, इट इज लाइक वन ओरिजिनेटेड फ्रॉम वनसेल्फ एंड प्रोसीडिंग फ्रॉम वनसेल्फ. अभिमथति मतलब मथन कर देता है, चूरा चूरा चूर कर देता है, मथन कर देता है. दुम्मेदम, उस मूर्ख को जो पाप उसने किया है, इट क्रशेज द फूल. इन व्हाट इज द एनालॉजी गिवन? वज्रंग वसमायंग मणि. वज्रंग वज्र डायमंड का है. Just like a diamond will crush any gem can be crushed. Money को crush कर देता है. So उसी तरह से the evil which is done by oneself and proceeding from oneself, it crushes the fool, just like a diamond can crush a hard gem. So the story is associated is about a lay disciple, Mahakarma. He went to the monastery for the night, and next morning when he came out from there, stopped by a pond to wash the fish, and there, as ill luck would have it, some previous night thieves had stolen something and dropped in that pond. So when they were being chased by the owners, and then they thought that this person is the thief because he is kept in the pond. So they beat him up and he died there of his injuries. So Buddha then, the monks went there and saw him and reported what had happened. And they said that it has happened because in a past life he had fallen in love with a woman and he had beaten her husband to death. So this was the consequence of that action, that he unwittingly was killed by the people, a mistaken notion. So these are the 5 verses. I took 5 because next 5 more left, so we'll complete it next.
जो Vago है, this is about
Self-improvement. How we can improve ourselves. So this is in the conventional domain. So we have to present what we
I have not read the book. I am sorry for
that's all right.
not being able to.
I thought I'll take up a sutta, then I felt this is all right. Because it's difficult to make presentation made by somebody else, but then we try to. So we finish the selfless intention. Yeah. So we come to the effort. That is the, I think, the next chapter. The whole concept is so counterintuitive that we need to really reflect upon it very deeply and understand. You would, I think, appreciate that effort is the consequence of an intention. You all have come here with great effort because there was an intention, otherwise why should you come? So it is the intention which establishes the effort, is the manifestation, which eventually is the seed which transforms into an effort. Now, we have already seen in the past that the intention can be in the domain of the worldly thinking or in the domain of what he called as the vertical intention and the horizontal intention. What Cart calls as the primary purpose and the secondary purpose. Now, for majority of us as meditators, we are all still confined within the secondary intention. That's what he is trying to point out. What does it mean? That we see ourselves as a person. That is the starting point from all our effort. So I see that I have so much craving, so much anger, I get very easily upset, and I have some other difficulty in my life which I am not able to handle. So then we hear the words of Buddha and hear and then say, okay, this will give me some relief, we meet some friends and then we go for meditation. And then when we meditate we find, yes, something as good has happened after 10 days. Anger has come down, I am feeling relaxed. And then we continue that practice and then we keep on evaluating. And we are advised also to evaluate naturally. Okay, after 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and I find, yes, something is happening. There is a reduction in the anger, reduction in aversions, reduction in craving, so we feel good about it actually. But sometimes suddenly you find all things going haywire. The effect tapers off, meditation effort tapers off, and again the same thing starts all over again. They say, okay, we should put more efforts. Even harder effort is going on. And then we try to, kind of image which we have of ourselves as a meditator, we polish it. बहुत सारे शिविर कर रहा हूँ, I'm becoming better. And many times we then have a kind of mask, well, I've done long course and now I should be feeling better. I may not be feeling better, but because I have heard that I should be feeling better, I kind of get into a kind of complex. So it does not matter even if at the end of the course I'm not feeling well. It's probably continuation of the course. So this is the kind of explanations we give ourselves, which are partially true, not wrong, but to try to remain within that very domain so that we don't question it. So that we don't question this whole issue of why is it happening. We don't do a deeper questioning of it because we tend to get convinced in the horizontal domain that more effort, थोड़ा सा राग द्वेष कम हो रहा है, ज़्यादा एफर्ट करेंगे तो और कम हो जाएगा, जीरो हो जाएगा, without seeing the inherent flaw in that argument. So this remains an effort which is not really wise because it remains within the domain of I am there, I am doing effort and I am going to become better. So I want to become enlightened keeping I intact, which is impossible. This is fundamental contradiction. So what he is trying to point out is that wise effort is to confront rather than surmount the limitations. So we should understand and explore this. The whole idea of Buddha's teaching was to understand. Thus as there is suffering, it should be understood. He doesn't say it should be overcome. You see? But we obviously want to overcome suffering. What is this? What is the big deal of understanding? Isn't it? The fact that you start, the majority of us will start from that understanding and want to overcome. But he points out in his teaching is precise, it should be understood. So we should comprehend this whole issue in a deeper sense, not in a, or I would say in a very deep sense, not just in the sense of on the understanding from the level of mind. So the whole idea of wise effort would be, which is being tuned with vertical intention, would be that we try to understand what is happening. We try to understand who is meditating. We're not just happy with being good meditator. It's not that it's bad, it's good. I mean, obviously it's better to be meditator than not being meditator. It's better to be a good meditator than a lousy meditator. But the point being made is that when we keep our identity intact, then the effort will not be wise, because it will be like a big stumbling block, as if we have put a big stone round our foot and we are trying to walk, and that obviously reduces our possibilities of walking. So what is wise effort? He then points out it starts with asking wise questions. So the questions being like, who is suffering? Not just only there is suffering, who is suffering? If you try to ask that question and investigate the root cause of suffering, what Buddha calls as the root cause of suffering. So he says, if you recall, we have mentioned it many times, ultimately he says, Sankhitena Panchupadana Khanda Dukkha. That in brief or in precisely, it is the 5 aggregates to which we cling, which are the suffering. This we need to investigate. We need to take it up very deeply. And when we investigate deeply, the questions themselves give rise to an understanding. The investigation itself gives rise to understanding. So we then try to abide in the question and not seek an answer. The answer naturally emerges. We are not applying our mind to seek an answer. Obviously in the beginning we will apply. So there is a kind of 2 strategies which Buddha has given, and we need to really see through them. That while in the beginning it will be good to, we'll all start with the identity intact. We should, a time should come when we should realize that this notion of identity itself is becoming a stumbling block and not allowing us to move further and to really be at peace, to be free from suffering. Because all the conflicts which arise, they arise from the identity. As long as I am there, there is the other. I and other are there, and there is a conflict. So that deeper understanding that identity is the cause of conflict will become evident when we try to investigate at a very deeper level without trying to mentally analyze it. And we can become, that kind of an insight can emerge. So any effort which is therefore rooted in I, rooted in a self, will therefore take us thus far and not really take away from the suffering. So as we have to move in the vertical direction, if you want to move in that direction, then the effort based on identity should be reduced and we should try to abide in the reality. Because what Buddha teaches us is the cause of suffering is tanha, you see, and tanha can be bhavatanha as well as vibhavatanha and kamatanha. Kamatanha is of course the coarse form of sensual pleasures. Bhavatanha is you want to become something. Could be you want to become a good meditator, you want to become a CEO, you want to become President of India, or you want to become an enlightened person. Doesn't matter. They are all bhavatanha. Then there is Vibhavatana. I want to give up my cravings, I want to give up my attachments, I want to be free from suffering. That also is a Tanha. So what do we do? Just be aware of it. So the acceptance of the reality, Yatha Bhuta Jnana Darshanam, as the Buddha puts it, is the path. So acceptance of the reality means you live in the present every moment. Whatever is happening, just be aware of it. Whether it is pleasant, whether it is unpleasant, without any effort to change it in this way or that. So that is the path to vertical intention and vertical integration in our life. That's what we is trying to point out as the wise effort. The less we try to self-effort, our way towards or away from anything. We don't want to go somewhere and we don't want to run away from something. Just abide in the reality as it is. So this is what the Eckhart also used to call points out. That there is a natural state of harmony. This of course needs a great faith because you can't really work it on. Otherwise everything seems to be in disorder and how can you say that things should not be, I should not really move and try to set the things in order. So the quotation which he uses there in the beginning, which I might have seen in my mail also, we are not here to change the world is here to change us. So it changes the whole person. Of course, implicitly, if Buddha changed the world, if we see, it was not that Buddha just changed himself. As a result of which becoming changed, the world got changed. So the effect is there, but we change the order of effect. So, and when we want to do vertical integration, we see the world as it is, accept it, and see what we have to learn from the world. And in that process of learning, we can become so integrated that the world will be transformed because of our presence. So we don't keep as an objective that I am going to set the world in order. I keep the objective, if it has to be kept, I will set myself in order, come in harmony with the world. So if I come in harmony with the world, then naturally that harmony will manifest itself in the form of a salutary transformation.
But sir, horizontal domain and vertical domain, both will exist together.
Yeah.
In the horizontal level, I will still strive to.
Once the vertical integration has taken place, then striving will reduce naturally. Then will be a natural consequence. It will be a natural consequence of a pure mind, of a mind one who doesn't see others as adversaries. At the moment, there is a tendency to see everybody else as an adversary, of some order, or some may be very mild, some may be very soft. But mostly it is seeing as an adversary, competitor, or something of that kind. So once that illusion of otherness is finished, once we have understood the interconnectedness, understood that this is an illusion because of the identity, then it doesn't mean that we don't work in the horizontal domain, but the actions are motivated by that understanding which manifests in loving kindness and compassion and kindness. Because the heart is then operating, not the mind. So that is the transformation which will automatically take place. So, just a comment. There is a question. You're not able to do this. You can't see this. You have to go
Yeah,
back.
it's fine.
Huh? Text is visible. So, in the beginning, we are going to do willful exertion. There's no doubt about it. I want to transform myself. As we move further and further, we realize that there is no I really who can do much of it. There is not much control we have. And once we leave the control and become in harmony, then the transformation becomes natural. So that is the paradox of the Buddha's path, put it that way. So as we develop more and more insight, the effort also becomes transformed from great effort to less effort to effortlessness. So You can say meditation becomes effortless. Then you are meditating all the time. You are constantly in harmony with the world around. There is no disharmony of any kind. So that's why what he has put in his effort is releasing the need to be separate. That the identity is not there. If there is no individual identity and you realize the same is true of others, then that separateness is not seen in that light. It is, of course, at the conventional level we are separate. We don't get into that confusion also. At the conventional level we operate in that domain, but we understand the deeper aspect of integration also, of interconnectedness. And then we work from that insight, we work in the horizontal domain.
So, one question. When we take Adhishthan, then from the Adhishthan it naturally follows that effort will flow to that. So, isn't there any...
In the beginning it is good to do that. In the beginning it is good to bring the mind and restrain the mind to self-control, or they are good, because they help us in horizontal domain of activity. They are helpful. You will find that many of the Advaita people, they don't have restraint on them, speech or about actions, and they can say anything and do that. But since they are integrated horizontally or vertically, they would be in a position to dispel it very quickly. So all these efforts which we do normally as a beginning is helpful in that sense. But if we remain confined to that, then we get caught in the web of effort. We can't really progress in that sense. You can't really be at peace and harmony with the world. You can't really, because enlightenment is not of a person. Enlightenment is when the emotional personality is given. So there is a fundamental mistake in holding on to effort for a long time. If I think that I will become enlightened, that's not possible. There is no I who can ever become enlightened. Enlightenment is seeing through the illusion of I. So that is there, and so it sounds so counterintuitive. So therefore, so much of discussion and understanding is needed as to what do we do really in life to put it into practice. How do we really come in tune with this totally counterintuitive thing that there is no I, that I is a construct. So for example, these 4 hours which he has given, they are in that direction helpful. That what is the effort really needed for integration is this. He says he has put these 4 hours. I think you would recall this. What is this? Another Bhante had also put 6 hours or so. Slightly different, but basically the same. What are we trying to say? These are the 4 things which you should practice: relax, release, relinquish, and rejoin. So you can see we are all acts of surrender, not of willful doing something.
Actually, I just want to say that in Adhishthan, I thought there are 2 ways to look at it in context of exactly these 4 hours. One is to say, कुछ भी हो जाए मैं हाथ नहीं लाऊंगा, या अगर मुझे खुशकी हो रही है तो मैं कुछ नहीं करूँगा. That's an effort thing. Second way to that it happens is that if you are completely sort of just being, not trying to do anything, then also the same result will appear, it seems, in the sense that you are not making an effort to be still, you are just still. So in that sense there is an effortless Adhishthan also, but that you can't forcefully do. And I think that is another way to...
With practice, Adhishthan also becomes effortless. Practice it becomes effortless. And because having been a teacher, I know we try to advise the student not to force oneself to such an extent that it creates a aversion towards the office. The idea is cultivating mind equanimity, not to force oneself into a particular posture for long periods of time, even at the cost of pain. So the objective, if you want to put it, is to become more equanimous even under painful circumstances. So we learn it slowly and slowly. Just as a person who is doing weightlifting, he starts with 1 kg, then 2 kg, then 10 kg. Exactly the same way should be done. So you need to do it. So that is the the conventional way of looking at it in that manner. But a person can do a strong determination. When Buddha sat below the Bodhi tree, he made a strong determination. I will not do that. I will move my posture even if anything may happen. That is with the strong merits which he had gained in the past. He had that ability to do it. So that self-view does get into complications. So all the inner weaknesses come to the fore and face them. This happened with Buddha also. We had to face all the difficulties of various kinds which are represented by Mara coming and attacking him and this and that. See, the biggest issue in this is that when we want to relax and when we want to we say we must meditate and then be relaxed, it sounds to be a contradiction. We should be attentive and relaxed. What does it mean? But this is a matter of practice. One can be relaxed and one can be attentive. So that's the way we slowly learn to give up the kind of control. And in the absolute sense, we don't have much control on ourselves. We try to think because we have a limited control. So we get into the feeling that I will make sure that I will not move. This is a kind of ego manifesting in a different way. So that feeling of control is one of the very fundamental things in the horizontal domain. Because without that we can't live in the world. I should have control over things. As simple thing as walking or driving a car, I should have control on the car. Otherwise what will happen? So we try to carry forward that very notion into our spiritual domain also. It works to some extent, but when we talk of seeing through the illusion of identity, then that has to be really given, because otherwise it's not necessary.
So for Arjuna, can you expand on that?
He has done it in this next. He has written that. So what does relax mean? This is release of physical and mental tension. So there is a relaxed and alert observation. It is what is right as spiritual foundation for the study. So there is no resistance. The resistance is you can see in our day-to-day life, you can see in our meditation. We don't like what is. So Kartolek says, what do you think of reality? He says, I don't like it at all. You have to put it in a more blunt way. So this is what our notion is. Reality is useless. If I like it, then what will I do? I have nothing to do. Life will become finished. So you have to see that from the perspective of that we come to equilibrium, we come to harmony with the world. And from that harmony will emerge the action which is needed, right action which is needed at that time, if it is needed. If it is not needed, you are at peace. So this is one of the very basic things which is required even in meditation. When we sit and meditate, we have two times, आज देखने का मन कैसे भटकेगा, मुश्किल हो जाती है. It becomes quite a. On the other hand, if you relax, जाने दो जहाँ जा रहा है, खुश हो जाएंगे. So there has to be a kind of equilibrium set. And what is nicely put is, near enemy of relaxation is indulgence. If you are not careful, because relaxation will give you comfort and then you begin to indulge into it, so you get into real trouble. So one has to see that it should be relaxed attentiveness. If you are attentive, you are mindful, but not tense. So that comes with practice. You really put in more words than that. Then believe this that we are not too much bothered about the outcome also. कि आज मैंने 1 घंटा सेटिंग की तो कितने किलो क्रेविंग कम हो गई या कितने ग्राम क्रेविंग कम हो गई, इस चक्कर में रहेंगे तो बहुत मुश्किल हो जाएगा. So we have to see that the natural, we have to kind of develop a faith in the process of observation rather than in the outcomes every time, bothered about outcomes. So it's an act of faith, surrender. It's in some sense surrender, okay, just observing what is happening. So some people say it's a surrendering to the power of awareness, pure awareness. Because awareness, if one is just being aware of whatever is happening in the body and the mind, and even if there are lousy thoughts happening or cravings happening or whatever, you're just aware, you're not getting attached to them, you're not taking them personally, then you're at peace. There's no resistance to whatever is up. No, you are meditating and suddenly a very nasty thought comes and feel so bad. Because then you are resisting what the reality is. You're taking them personally, taking the thoughts personally. You don't see them happening like the wind. There's one discourse of the Buddha where he talks of winds. Sometimes flow, they are fragrant, sometimes they are bad smelling, sometimes hot, sometimes cold. Just let them go. Just feel them and let them go. Don't hold on to them. Don't take them personally. So that's what is really meant here. That we don't really, we trust that the process of observation itself is the right one, and leave the rest. Don't really evaluate it too strongly every time and hope that we'll have everything within our control. He's given various examples like hand is open and hand in a fist, which means releasing control, and let the nature operate. As they say, meditation happens rather than you are meditating. That's the kind of thing being pointed out. It becomes a natural process. So we are releasing that strong hold of controlling whatever is happening. Then relinquishing is, in some sense, letting go of things, what is usually termed as it is. Willfully we do it as kind of ascetic practices, or as renunciation, or as giving up things. That is willfully we do. But if we develop a clear insight into no self, or what you call as emptiness, then it is a natural phenomenon. You keep only as much as you want. You don't need to keep so many things with you. So then the person is not doing any great act of renunciation. I'm just reminded of a saint who put it very beautifully. His name was Swami Sharanananda. I don't know if you have heard about him. He made an ashram, later he set up an ashram in Punjab. He was blind by birth. Not by birth, at the age of 5 he became blind. And he is an extraordinary saint. And he didn't study anything. At the age of 10 he became blind, studied till 4th class. And then got insights of the kind that he is seen as one of the greatest philosophers in India. He was invited by Indian Council of Philosophical Research to give them a talk. He explains it so powerfully. So this issue of renunciation we talked about once, that a big Sage came to him and he said, I want to, हिंदी में बोलते थे, तो मैं कुछ थोड़ा बहुत दान करना चाहता हूँ, तो आप तो बहुत महान दानी हैं, आपका जैसे तो मैं क्या करूँ, आपके पास तो आप बिल्कुल renunciate हैं, कुछ भी नहीं रखते, पहले तो कपड़े नहीं पहनते थे because he didn't have sight, so फिर उनके शिष्यों ने कहा कुछ तो पहन दिया करो, फिर से पहना तो पहन. So then he told him कि नहीं ऐसा नहीं है, आप भी सबसे ज़्यादा renunciate तो आप हैं, मैं कहाँ renunciate हूँ, मैं तो तोड़ करके देखता हूँ, कैसे आप, मैं कैसे renunciate हूँ, आपने मेरे साथ इतने सालों से आप मेरे साथ हैं, आपको समझ गया कि शुद्ध धर्म ये है और ऐसे धर्म को पालन करना चाहिए, आपने उसको छोड़ रखा. तो जितनी महंगी चीजें आपने उसको छोड़ रखी है, मैंने तो पकड़ के रखी हुई है. The thing which is most valuable, you renounce that, so you are a bigger renunciate than I am. So it's a putting things, the person can strike you so strongly that for a person who is realized, there is no renunciation, it is natural. कभी कोई अच्छी मिठाई खा ले तो गुड़ का रिनंसिएशन थोड़ा ना करता है, वो छोड़ दिया यार, उसको काहे खाना, अच्छी मिठाई मिल गई, आपने तो अच्छी मिठाई छोड़ी हुई है, मैं गुड़ खाए जा रहा हूँ. So that's the way you see renunciation in the true sense of the term. Then it's not a willful act. It is a natural consequence of understanding. So that is what he means by relinquishing. And then he talks of rejoining is trying to relate the conventional world to this insight. See, then if the insight is there, then the rejoining is effortless. You don't have to put effort. You understand that each one of us is empty. There is no individual here or individual there. But in the conventional level, we have to talk. You can't say no individual will come here. You have to say something. So you use certain way of convention, certain things. But the person understands the differences, but that doesn't become his fundamental governing paradigm. He uses a beautiful position. He says it's no longer his default position. Our default program is we are all different and we have adversaries, competitors and all that. If you have really joined in the vertical integration, then that's not our default position. Our default position is we are all, there's no being in any one of us really. We are all bundles of sankharas manifesting in different ways. And we see it in that sense. So we don't dismiss the individuation. We understand, yes, they have this kind of strengths and weaknesses, this strength and weaknesses and so on. We appreciate them. We don't dismiss it. We don't kind of get into the other extreme. There's no I, then why are you crying? They give the example in the book of one person because they were running a hospice. So one person who took to this kind of teaching in a impractical way. He says he once went to the hospital ward, that ward where people were, various stages of terminal disease. He went and shouted at them, "Why are you upset? There's no I who is dying." There's no death, there's no I. Don't worry, be happy, get up. So next thing I did was to ask him to leave the hospital and get lost. You can't forget the differentiation. They're existing. The reality is existing at the convention. So that's this chapter. In the next chapter he has written action from emptiness, but I noticed that there is one more chapter which he has omitted. I don't know why. Is it there? Just see. आगे भी है क्या? आगे है this chapter on language. I think he thought it probably not necessary.
Yes.
But I think I would like to point out to you because I find it quite important. Language entrapping view, that is the next chapter.
ये बड़ा आंसर लिखते हैं ना पेपर में बच्चे, तो बच्चों को लगता है कि सर सब कुछ नहीं लिखेंगे, शुरू को पढ़ेंगे आगे को पढ़ेंगे तो नंबर दे देंगे.
This also doesn't sound very important also, that language is entrapping, but I think from practical point of view it is of great importance, because what he is trying to point out there is that all this way language is developed, it has its basis in duality, basis in identity, individual identity. So that's how the language is developed. And the basis is in identifying ourselves with the body. So the language is developed like that. And we keep on speaking the same language continuously. So if we keep on speaking this language, we will always remain in that worldview. It's so difficult to get out of that worldview. The worldview itself is counterintuitive, and all the time we are speaking a language of that kind. So he's trying to point it out as a very important thing, that we should be mindful of it, and we should try to become aware of it and see wherever we can see the language of the vertical intention, the language of selflessness and egolessness and observation and pure awareness. This is normal talk. If I have to see and talk to you and mention to you, I don't say the body is warm, I say I am having fever. So I have identified implicitly with the body. So you can see, whatever the way, every time when we speak, that I is prominent in that, and that I is associated with either the body, any of those five khandhas. I am upset, I am not feeling well, I am having headache, I want to go there, I am enjoying life. And you see all those sentences, analyze them. In every sentence, there is an implicit identification of I with any of these 5 khandas. Now, around the clock, you are going to use this notion of language and interact with that language. The chances of our comprehending the other dimensions to that extent made more difficult. So that's the point which he is trying to make. That language can become a big problem and we should be aware of it. And there he points out that Buddha uses 2 languages. The language of evolution and the language of presence, language of now. So we should be mindful of the both. He says that if we are not mindful of it, we can get carried away either by one or the other. The language of evolution is that you have to work hard. Attari yatana karo, sudantam apne ko restrain karo, sheel ka palan karo. All that is a part of Buddha's teaching, isn't it? You should practice sheelas, you should, and even in Anapanasati we learn, Sikhati, Sabbagaya Patisam Vedi Yastasya Sami Sikhati. He learns, he practices. So learning and practicing is a part of it. So there is this evolutionary language where we say we should work hard, we should work to remove our rag, our desh, our cravings. So that is also a part of the teaching. We can't overlook it. But we should be aware the limitations of that language. And that is based, and it is what he calls as it is based for the initiation of the beginning part. That is a very important thing. Let me just see if I can. Yeah, he points out, in fact, a paradox in this whole issue of impermanence also. When we do this kind of practices and we talk of evolution, we say, yes, I am evolving. My craving has become less, my aversion has become less, but somehow I remain intact. So everything else is anicca, but I is not anicca. Why is it not anicca? Because it is a concept actually. So he points out this, that the language forces us away from reality and we get caught in the concept. Now, this is a very, of course, a fundamental philosophic issue of difference between concept and reality. One in one or two discourses, but just hints at that. Whenever if you see the language, whenever we describe anything, we limit the reality within describable words. So, as a result of this is the limitation of the oriental domain, because this is the way language works and this is the way we can gather knowledge. We can gather knowledge by concepts and generalizing the concepts. There is no other way. The way of the direct experience of the reality is not given to the mental domain. So this issue of concept needs to be partially understood. It's a bit abstract. Let's see whether we can break through this abstraction. See, when we interact with the world outside, what happens? We see a person, boy, girl, finished. So we have made a concept of it and the matter ends. We don't see the totality of the person. Tree, dog, and we don't see the reality, we see the concept. And eventually, when we interact with the world around, we are actually interacting with the concepts. We are not interacting with the reality. Because the reality of anything which is in front of us is much more than the name which we give to it. We give it a name. X, Y, Z. Apple. So this apple, once we say apple, we tend to think, we know it, so we forget about it. We don't put attention to it. So what he's pointing out is that once we conceptualize things, we have a tendency to ignore the details and we don't really become mindful of it in the comprehensive sense. Sati Sampajanya means comprehensive mindfulness, being aware of its totality. You remember we had discussed all the dimensions of the four dimensions of Sampajanya. The purpose of the activity, the suitability of the action, and the domain of these, and then the asammoha, not being deluded. Most of the time, the concepts delude us into believing reality is confined in that box. So what he's pointing out is that language has its limitation because it can deal with concepts. It can't deal with complete reality. If it has to deal with complete reality, तो एक चीज को describe करने में ही सारा समय उसी में निकल जाएगा. Because you can't really describe it in words. You can't describe a simple thing. Even an apple, suppose you have to describe. What will you describe? Its color, its taste. You can't describe the taste. You can't even describe the color because it is so very fleeting, so very changeful. You can't describe the taste, and you can't describe the other properties of it. So if you have to describe it totally, comprehensively, it's virtually impossible for a language to describe your one thing. So we bundle it in a concept, like apple, and then we study apple as this property, and we finish it. So we kind of conceptualize the world around us and think that we know the world. And that becomes a limitation from the perspective of understanding reality.
Is this a problem of the language or the limitation of the human comprehension itself?
Both it is more of a comprehensive problem because we are limited by our senses to see. We are limited by that. But even though there is a limitation, we can apply all the six senses and try to get a bigger picture of it. It's like a two-dimensional picture and a hologram. Isn't it? We can get a hologram now and get an overall perspective, much better perspective than a straight photograph on a piece of paper. So the comprehension is a limitation as well as the language is a limitation. So the issue of language, and therefore it is said, in fact surprisingly modern psychology also began to understand this and point out that when we talk of a language, it can only deal with certain concepts. And when you try to find out what is this I, so it is also actually a concept. It's not reality. It is not just a concept describing a reality, it is actually a construct. To go one step further, it is a mental construct. Meaning, to make sense of what is happening, we have created an I. I see there is a scene. So rather than saying there is a scene, I say I see. There is hearing. So rather than saying there is hearing, I say I am hearing. Because of various sensory inputs which we get, and to make sense out of them, we collate them together. And because there is a ability of a memory is available with us. So that memory creates the illusion of continuity. So most of the time, continuity is with what? If you reflect deeply, most of the time continuity is with what we call as a body. I have that perception that this is my body and I understand it is changing. This much I understand. I am a wise person, so I understand this body is changing. It was like this, now it has become like this. My hair was white, black, now it has become black. This is happening. These are changes that happen. But it is always my. Why? Because that's the way I identify with it. There is no other identification. But if I reflect deeply and say, why am I calling it mine? Then I can't find any reason. There is no justification for calling it mine. The way we have studied in various suttas, impermanence, lack of control, not obtained by my own efforts, and so on. So, but since these experiences are there are experiences, no doubt. There's seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and all the thinking is going on. But to make sense of it, and since we have a memory, we try to think it is happening to me as a person, as an individual. So to be able to overcome this, we have to be careful about the language. So the limitation of the language is that how will you interact with another person if you don't use I and you? There is no other way. If I don't use the word I and use the pronoun you or your or he or they, there is no way that we can interact with the world. So in the Oriental domain, this kind of language is necessary. but we should be aware of its limitation and not get carried away. Even if you see things like what is the purpose of my life, what is the meaning of the life. Now, if you investigate it deeply, the word purpose by itself means that I have to do something to get somewhere. So this is the language of evolution. But Buddha also points out the language of now. You remember then Bahaya Sutta. Vitthe vitthe mattam bhavisati sutte sutte mattam bhavisati. In seeing there is only seeing, in hearing there is only hearing. When you did, then you are neither there nor there, and when there is no nor in between, you are liberated. There is no I. So in very crisp way he points out a shortcut, straight way to the elimination of the notion of I. So we have to see that. You can't eliminate the notion of I by doing effort based on I. Now this is a fundamental thing which needs to be comprehended. And language creates that illusion. So we have to be aware of the limitations of the language. When you say, oh no, I have to work hard and I must after all improve, Buddha said you must work hard and you must do all this, sati pathan karna chahiye, sati pratishthit karni chahiye, you must cultivate. Buddha is saying it, no? You must cultivate. So obviously you should do it, no doubt about it. But with what perspective? You see, if you read Sati Patthana, then how does it end? Yavadev Dhyanamattai Sati Mattai Pati Sati Mattai. So Arthikayoti, it ends up there. When you inculcate, when you cultivate Sati more and more, what should be the culmination of it? Arthikayoti. Oh, this is body. Arthichittoti, this is chitta. इसको चित्त कहते हैं और कोई बात नहीं. It's just the name called kaya which functions in this manner. Athi dhammoti, this is what has arisen. So no big deal. So the Yavadev Dhyanamattaya Patisati Mattaya. So till such time as the practice is till such time as there is only awareness, there is only knowledge. So you can see from the cultivation of this, it says if you cultivate till this insight emerges. And how this insight will emerge? By combining all the teaching put together. So that's the key point which has been mentioned in this book. So this is kind of sewn into each and every page of the book, that this is what we should be aware. So in this chapter on language, he has pointed out this point about Buddha teaching both the things.
Krishnamurti used to explain this very powerfully. Funny thing is he used to call himself K, which you can look at it in arrogantly also, and also as a manifestation of the same phenomena. But he used to say, when you see a mango tree, you just pattern match with your memory, you just don't see the tree. You have never seen the tree. He would insist and say, "Aap kabhi kuch dekhte nahi." So if you want to see the tree, you have to get rid of the naam roop that is told and see the tree. So, but we can't. I can't see the tree. So,
we are fortunate that Buddha speaks both the language of evolution and the language of now fluently. But the two views are really like oil and water. Some practitioners are able to easily move across views without much disruption. Others are too invested in Buddhism, meaning only one thing, and they have to leave Buddhism in order to hear the alternative language. So you have to see the difficulty there. So when he uses the language of now, what does it mean? That the reality is perfect. You don't have to do anything in it. You have to be in harmony with it.
So for people who describe their so-called enlightenment experience, so one person I remember is Swamiji Krishnamurti, the other Krishnamurti. And when I read it, what I felt was exactly what you were saying about abstractions we create in language. If you don't have that, there is so much signal that your senses will get. So it seems as your ability to receive those signals magnifies tremendously, that you get all of that and you have no ability to have abstractions and language. That is apparently really describing not describing, being one with the apple or whatever. That is what I have sort of.
You can see that, if you go out for a walk and look at a tree, if you just see it
Right.
without any
Preconceived
without any expectation or looking for something, then the seeing process becomes different. And especially if you are with your awareness in a deeper sense, because you are walking and you are aware of the body, and then you look at something, then you see that in a different light. It shines brighter. It will suddenly start shining brighter. In the sense that your senses become brighter because you are more mindful and you are able to receive the input. You see the trees, leaves, the color, the changes, the movements which happen. You can feel that there is a movement. But it's not necessarily a way of perception. It's not necessary that it should always manifest in this particular manner. So another big issue which arises is that we try to generalize and think that every experience should be of the same kind. It's not that every experience will be of the same kind. The issue of language is primarily because when we abstract some portions, it's necessary.
Yes,
Modern science also does it.
Yeah, that's efficiency.
Otherwise, you will not be able to work.
Yeah.
If you were to say that it's the whole issue of reductionism. Otherwise, how will you? If you say you have to build an aeroplane and you say no, we will not do reduction, we will build it right away. Impossible.
The very concept of x equal to something, you are doing that. You are saying the whole thing is x right now.
You have to kind of, for the purpose of the worldly transactions, you have to abstract away. From the reality, a portion has to be abstracted. It's like look at a tree. A botanist will look at the tree in a one particular way. A woodcutter will look at it in another way. A painter will look at it in another way. And a bird will look at it in another way. Isn't it? Same tree. Why? Because they abstract certain different aspects of that tree. We are not in a position to look at the whole tree totally, unless we have a very comprehensive mindfulness and awareness that we can see the totality of the things in different manners. Then you will see the tree as a manifestation of consciousness, fragment, in a different way. So the language will be difficult then for it to describe. How will you describe? And we can see the limitation of language in describing experience. Even a simple experience like eating, you can't describe it. You can't describe, suppose you say, this is a rasgulla and this is honey. Okay, describe what is the difference in this taste. What do you say? There's no words for it. You can't describe the experience of sweetness, difference between sweetness of a honey and sweetness of a rasgulla. Impossible to describe in words. There's no way. You can try.
Yeah, the whole field of literature is man's attempt to try and do that, and so you'll be delighted that here is another way, but then of course that is not complete.
So the chapter on language, what is the title? Language entrapping you. That when you see it, you should be mindful. Obviously, you have to use language, but one should be mindful that it can entrap your view. It can limit your view to a certain aspect of reality rather than the reality as a whole. So he's pointing out that unfortunately this language associated with the now, with the present moment, is not so prevalent, is not so often used. These words like radiant mind and Buddha nature or pure consciousness and all that. We're not used to conversing with each other in those terms, and it's difficult to integrate it into this. But at least one should be aware of the limitation of the language, not get carried away with it. Because if we are aware of the limitations, the chances are that we will not get carried away by the limitations of the language. So that is that, I think, very brief summary of that chapter. And he points out the difficulty of language at now from a small anecdote he has. The Dalai Lama was once asked why he emphasized kindness and never talked of emptiness. He says, kindness is safer. Very beautiful answer. Because with emptiness one can get crazy. You can behave in a crazy manner. If you have not integrated it and heard about it and then you start putting it into practice whenever it suits you. So, because that is the difficulty of that vertical, because it's beyond describe. That's why they say don't describe it. You always put it in negative terms. So that and therefore the limitations of the language is to be seen. So of course one can be more careful even in day-to-day life. The kind of words which we use, the use of word I and me, how we associate with the body. So we can try to be mindful of it.
That's what NLP tries to mirror stick to that.
So there is pain rather than I am in pain. I am not having headache, there is feeling of pain here. In fact, Buddha never says I am suffering. But we didn't pay attention. Yes, there is suffering. There is no question of I am suffering. There is no issue of that. चिल्लाए और सही but knowing which sensation
इसको अगर सेंसेशन की तरह देखते हैं तो थोड़ा सा आसान है.
अटैचमेंट है ना बॉडी के प्रति जो अटैचमेंट है इवेंचुअली दैट फंडामेंटल आइडेंटिटी है ना identity with the body. So the lesser the identity with the body, lesser will be the kind of reaction. Pain to होगा and if pain is there and it produces a reaction, don't take it personally. जितना सहन कर सके उतना करें. वो फिर अति हो जाने वाली बात होगी. हमारा सारा उद्देश्य यही होगा कि हमको तो अपने को पेन से बढ़ाना, वो उद्देश्य नहीं है ना. लिविंग इन हार्मनी विद नेचर का उद्देश्य है दैट व्हाटएवर इज देयर यू डू इट. अगर पॉसिबल है तो देन, और नहीं पॉसिबल नहीं है. सो वी डोंट गेट इनटू द एक्सट्रीम्स. मैं तो करके ही दिखाऊंगा, वो अहम पुष्टि होता है. There is this example of one Tibetan master, I forget his name. His very close friend died at a young age. So he was very attached to him. So he went for the funeral and then after the funeral he saw, and then he uttered a huge cry. And then Tibetan was a strong cry. He was stricken in kind of to express his grief. Finished. So I was feeling so upset. Let me take it out and be done with it. So why should I have I keep up an image of being a big Tibetan Lama? What does it matter? Feeling upset. So I shout and was my friend. Ended. So this also is a tea, you name tea or normal tea? Because this is the feel that I try to force you to take. No, that was very great. Very good. चलो फिर वही बना दो. रेड वाली अच्छी लगती है.
ये चुपचाप पीने वाले हैं वो नहीं है.
He experiences him as the master, na?
So So this is the, for the next chapter, this quotation is very good, so we'll stop from there. Action from emptiness. So he says, do you have the patience to wait till your mind settles and water is clear? And you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself. Of course, in the horizontal domain, it may or may not be possible. But definitely in the domain of inquiry into the nature of self, that should be kept as a guiding post, really quite helpful.
But perhaps even in the horizontal domain,
It can be greatly helpful. Yeah, sometimes it is not possible. We are forced to respond immediately. There also, if you can just remember this, then the response will be different and you get automatically modulated by this.
in fact, it almost seems to me that one uses this to filter intention, volition, then it automatically would lead for the action flowing out of the volition to be far more in line with the teaching.
From every concept, what happens in the mind, the moment the thought comes, then the associated thought will come. So, because thought is a form of a concept, and there are a series of thoughts associated, and then there will be proliferation. And if you are not mindful, you would be look at the prapanch. This prapanch starts expanding and expanding and expanding. If you see it for what it is, the whole thing stops there. Is there any question? What is it?
Pankaj is saying that we come one day to enjoy the tea.
You will?
Come one day to enjoy the tea.
Tea from the Far East.
Where is he?
He is in
Faridabad.
Faridabad.
Not for the lessons, then for the tea.
Chalo, very please.
I ask another question.
We had read that sutta, did we read about Nanda? See, Ananda's cousin Nanda, how he brought him to meditate. I think we had read it. I don't remember. This Ananda's cousin, by the name Nanda, he was, when Buddha went, it's not Ananda's cousin, Buddha's cousin. When Buddha went back to Kapilvastu for a few days after his enlightenment, so they were all obviously influenced and Nanda wanted to go with him. But he was about to be married on that day or the day after or something of that kind. But so he was torn between the two and looking at Buddha, Buddha probably might have asked him to come. So then he went and became a monk and went. And of course there was raiding in the family and all that. But being said that, then when he goes, then Nanda also started feeling very fancy and this and that. So he will entertain such thoughts again and again and again. She was so beautiful. So Buddha realized this dilemma of him. He said, suppose with this practice, if you do, you will see names of the Devaloka. What do you think about it? If you do that, then there is no problem. Then I'll practice. So उसको साधना दिखाई और concentration and all that. तो जो बाकी लोग थे मुझे को पता चल गया तो कहते थे ये इसलिए आया है कि अप्सरा देखने के लिए आया है यहाँ पे. But when he started practicing, he slowly realized the futility of all that and became enlightened.
The same story is he misses his wife too much and then with her leaves him with some limbs and
doesn't leave, he tells him, if you practice you will be able to lead your life in Devloka. The names there are great. So there's nothing wrong in that. When Buddha can do that, he uses the right means for everybody. So this whole issue of emptiness and issue of no self, quite a challenge to our understanding. And one cannot experience it unless one understands it deeply. That is the usual mistake we commit, that because anicca is something you can easily experience, dukkha is something you can experience in meditation. Anatta is not something you can experience in meditation easily. Or I don't know whether it can be experienced also, because many people say no. It is more of an insight which develops an understanding. And your way of looking at things changes. It is seen as akin to growing up. Given. But just as a child grows up and gives up his toys, he doesn't have to be told, isn't it? And we don't. I don't no longer would like to play with a toy which I used to play in his childhood. Nobody told me to give it up or do something of that kind. Natural progression, growing up. So that's the way anatta is seen as a process, growing up, because you're seen through the reality of the toys with which we play in the life. So if you see through that, then it becomes natural abiding. And all that we are studying is basically auxiliary helps which can help us in making that process transition, making that transition.
So you were talking of language and the trappings associated with it. I think the root cause of the problem is actually, language is a manifestation. The main problem is the worldview itself, how you think about it. And as kids, as we grow up in normal families, there is no reason for us to believe that there is any other worldview. We only would look at it and that's how we would grow up.
Yeah.
So are there, I'm assuming there are probably some monasteries or some places in the world where kids got exposure to this alternative worldview as they were growing up, and have we seen their becoming adults with completely different, with this more vertical than horizontal? There must be some examples of it there.
But I know that in these so-called Buddhist countries, they have a tradition that kids go to monasteries often. When they said here people go on summer vacation or something, they go to monasteries, live with the monks, doing their normal chores and helping them. But in the process of association with the monks and dealing with them, and some periodic talks and discourses with them, maybe some of them might, but majority of them, it's so counterintuitive. So it's not easy that you can be able to see through that.
Yeah, because if you
Because day-to-day occurrence, day-to-day interaction is all governed on the separation, and the appearances are so strong that you can't just see through the reality easily. What is the reality behind appearances? It's very difficult. The whole idea that the notion of I as a construct is so difficult, so difficult to see.
Because if you look at the countries where there may still be strong traditions of this, the larger population doesn't seem to be any different. Whether it be
Because the
China or Japan or even Ceylon, Sri Lanka.
governing paradigm is this influenced by this materialistic culture, strongly influenced. In some countries like Bhutan, which were isolated till recently, these were taking place. They kept themselves isolated for a long time. No TV, no interaction, nothing. Then how long could they do it? So they're all sleeping under the same McDonald's rage. Can't do much.
I was thinking that Tao De Jing is again it also has a lot of elements of anatta. So, and I find glimpses of it. So I don't know if there is I don't know how to put it, but Buddhist interpretation of, or somebody who understands this has written like a commentary or just explained it in that way.
What is many of the passages are quite in tune with this understanding, and there are
I have read
there are commentaries available, but written by scholars.
Scholars, yeah.
And by maybe some Buddhist must also.
I have read a lot of paraphrasing in English, which is not exactly word by word translations.
There is a book available.
Yeah, books. Stephen Mitchell has a book.
Yeah.
I have read. And there are many ones. I have seen more than one. They are good, but it's just that this is just poetry.
But it's quite explicit. Many things are very explicit.
Yeah.
What is the utility of a room? He says.
Yeah, it's space in between.
The utility of a room is from the windows. The walls are the things, or the thing within it, or the empty space in between. Obviously, the room has utility because of the empty space in between. It doesn't have any utility other than that. So it's trying to point out such things.
Utility of pot, also would be many examples like that.
So, we have not. This is the first book we are reading actually.
Yeah.
We have been reading only Suttas. Rajesh was very much impressed by this book, and I also purchased it, and then I also read it, and I said, yes, it's very good. So, because we had been dabbling with this concept of Anutta for a long time, because of the discourses it was coming. So we thought it will help us. So we have not studied any other book till now, but we can put it up. Very good. आपने ले लो?
So are there English translations of Ajahn Chah's?
Yeah, they are available. Wrote for discourses, as well as spoken, right phone. A large number. This Ajahn Sumedho are there. A large number of discourses are there. Books are there, 2 books, 2, 3 books.
So only Ajahn Chah discourses are found within 5 years.
No, they are not translated. They have been translated, and in YouTube there is a reading of that translated discourses. I recently saw that somebody has uploaded. So they have been translated into English, and then some monk has read them so that people can listen to them. This is very down to earth. He uses most of them are addressed to villagers. So he uses that kind of metaphors and language, which a person can easily understand.
There is a book where there are all stories told by Ajahn Chah, metaphors taken by him. They separated them from the discourses and published.
So this much becomes, I think, quite clear if you reflect and meditate deeply. Isn't that the root cause of suffering is really this notion of I. This much, I think, should become quite evident, quite clear, more and more clear. That's the real problem. This is this seed from where these are problems are springing. And if you try to find out who is this I, then you can't really lay your hands on anything. But there is that persistence.